Tonight's show is brought to you by SNHU's Department of Anthropology, Vendetti Optics, and you, our listeners. The first rule of Raccoon Fight Club is that you do not talk about Raccoon Fight Club. What is up, all of you Wayward Souls, and welcome back to the Wayward Stories podcast. Wayward Stories is the podcast where we tell the tales of our wanderings and our wonderings. And tonight, we're going to do something a little bit different. You may have noticed at the very top of the show, it mentioned that tonight's show is brought to you by Southern New Hampshire University's Department of Anthropology. Are they our sponsor? No. But was I lying to you? Also no. What we're doing tonight is we're going to bring back a very early episode from 2 years ago, and we're going to release it as a classic. Why are we doing that? Because I do not have an episode for you guys this week, for which you have my deepest and sincerest apologies, and that is not insincere. I mean that. I feel like crud right now about this. But due to finals over the last, basically 2 weeks, this has been a process. This has been a hell couple of weeks. I have not. It's funny, too, how the world, there must be like a retrograde or something going on. Because I've had two of the biggest hell weeks at work I can remember in recent memory, or maybe the entire time I've been at my current job. And it just happened to coincide with finals weeks. And literally, I haven't had a single waking moment. I am completely overwhelmed and currently contemplating that it might be kind of nice to give up on everything. That is not going to happen. But what is also not going to happen this week, unfortunately, is a fresh podcast episode. I have one in mind. I just didn't have time. So I'm going to bring back an episode from 2 years ago, the very beginning of the show. Listened through it today when I had this idea, because it was kind of like, this going to be this or it's going to be nothing. And I listened back through, and you guys know how I feel. I hate to listen to my own voice. I hate to listen to the early podcast. And it's just really hard on me. I'm like, God, that was so bad. It was so bad. It was so bad. But I was listening back through a couple of the very early ones, and I was like, wow, this wasn't that bad. And this one was in the first 7 episodes. So we're going to re-release it tonight for all of the new listeners. And a great deal of you have probably never heard the very, very first episodes. Very few people go back and listen to the entire catalog. So we're going to re-release Overnight on Big Bluff tonight, because it is a fun episode where lots of zany antics happened with the local wildlife, and it's also a really, really great adventure that any of you could go and take. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to cut out the old housekeeping, and just to irk my friend who does not listen to this show anymore, whoever the heck he was, that was so annoyed with the fact that we actually did what you call housekeeping in a conversational podcast, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. It's going to take possibly 2 minutes tops. First and foremost, I want to tell you something really cool that I just kind of realized recently. Now, if any of you have listened any amount of time, my mom passed away several years ago from breast cancer, and it was a pretty bad deal. I don't have very many things from her at all. She didn't have a lot. And one of the things I do have that I had forgotten all about that was in my keepsake box is this, which is, to most people, you'd say, oh, that looks kind of like an arrowhead or a spear point, because it is rather large. Well, it's not a spear point. But it was for me, I am a critical thinker, and I was like, you know what, but the odds, this is good, just as good at odds of being just a uniquely shaped rock. Sometimes things just happen in nature, that are random. And it's also really smooth around the edges. You can't really tell for sure if the edges are worked. And so I found it recently going through some stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this. At the next Archaeological Society meeting, I'm going to take it. I'm going to talk to the professors, and I'm going to show it to them and say, hey, what do we got here? Now, my mom had always told me she found it in either Shawnee Creek or Concert Creek, or one of the little feeder creeks that feeds into the Black Fork of the Poto River, south of Heavener, Oklahoma. And I took it in, and I showed it to these guys. And they're like, yeah, that's absolutely a preform. What a preform is, the reason this is so big, and you might say, oh, that looks like a spear point. What a preform is the indigenous people would go, if they found a really good source of the right kind of material, to nap into a lithic or say an arrowhead or a arrow point. And they would mock out a much larger version, but just in the general shape to make it easier to carry. And they would do a whole bunch of them, and they would take them back to somewhere else like the camp. And then they would work them into finished points to secure to arrows for hunting. So this is what you call a preform. It is a lithic. It is a preform. My mother found it, and it just kind of hit me that it was just really, really kind of cool that one of the very few things I have that belong to my mother just happens to be a lithic preform point. And I find myself today closing in on being a cultural anthropologist who specializes in indigenous history and is about to embark on his very first field schools this year for archaeology. And I don't know, that was just a little bit, what do you call that? Serendipitous. It's very cool. I think that's very cool. This is taking on a whole lot more meaning for me. And yeah, I think that's really, really cool. Second thing is, this got a brand new pair of sunglasses from my friends over at Bendetti Optics. These guys are a pair of Bridgers, and they are so sexy. You might say, Justin, are you going to be sexy now that you have these sunglasses? Probably not. I'm a 42-year-old man. There's only so much sexy I get to be. And but are the glasses themselves sexy? Hell yes, they are. I love our friends over at Bendetti. They sponsor the show, and I've told you guys before, they're just really great people. They hooked me up, wanted a new pair of shades, and I've got these beautiful new shades, Bridger, and I encourage all of you to go and check them out at BendettiOptics.com if you ever get the chance. $40 pairs of sunglasses, and y'all, they are really, really, really nice, and a lot of stuff to choose from. Anyway, I just really excited about those. I've been wanting a pair of those for quite some time now. Anyway, that's enough housekeeping for tonight. And I just want to say again, I apologize for bringing back an old episode as a classic. But again, I don't think a whole lot of you have probably ever heard it. And it is a really good episode. If you want to learn about gigantic raccoons, feral hogs, and the Milky Way from Big Bluff overlooking the Buffalo National River, I think you will enjoy tonight's show. So I'm going to drop you guys in through the magic of podcast editing right now. Tonight, we are going to talk about one of my very favorite places on this entire planet. We are departing from the first 6 episodes where I had this giant story arc going on about my story. And this is just a regular old adventure story of mine, one of my favorite stories. This was a hike I did last year, an overnight hike that I did last year. And the area in which I did it is the Ponca Wilderness, the Buffalo National River. For any of you who are uninitiated, we have a special gym right here in the state of Arkansas, in my home state. Actually, to be completely transparent, my home state is Oklahoma. I've lived in Arkansas for 20 years. Spent the first 20 years in Oklahoma, just across the line. I'm from this area. But right here in my current resident state of Arkansas, we have the Buffalo National River. The Buffalo National River is a really, really special place. It's home to the highest sheer bluff and the highest or tallest waterfall between the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachians, or the Appalachians, depending on what region of the country you're from and what colloquialism you prefer. And it is an absolutely beautiful place. To describe it, I think the best compliment I could give it is when you're standing or sitting on the gravel bar on the river, looking across the clear water, the clear, beautiful, green-tinted water at Big Bluff, towering above the river, 550 feet above the river. If you cut out that little section of the Ponca Wilderness and you dropped it into Yosemite Valley, or you dropped it into Yellowstone, or even somewhere in Big Sur, it wouldn't look out of place. That's probably the best compliment I could give it. It's not, don't take me wrong, it's not Yosemite Valley. It doesn't have 6, 7, 8 massive natural wonders like Upper and Lower Falls and El Cap and Half Dome. And It's not that, but it has, in its own right, if you set it into one of those areas, it would never look out of place. You wouldn't even question it. It's that beautiful and that dramatic in many ways. Big Bluff, as I mentioned, is 550 feet tall. The Buffalo National River was established as the nation's first national river in 1972. It's 135 miles of free-flowing river, one of the last remaining undammed rivers in the United States. And it's pretty popular in its own right. Like I said, it's the Buffalo National River, so it is administered by the National Park Service, and it sees 800,000 visitors a year. Not too far shy of 1 million. What were we talking about in the previous episodes about Yosemite and Big Sur? 4 to 5 million a year. Yeah, significantly less, but it's in the neighborhood. It's not unknown, though it is oft overlooked, in my opinion. What we're going to be talking about tonight is specifically the fact that the Buffalo National River and the Ponca Wilderness did gain dark sky park status in 2019. For those of you who don't know what a dark sky park is, a dark sky park is an area that is ordained as such because it is so remote and has so little light pollution that you have basically unparalleled views of the sky, because you don't have light pollution getting and hazing over the atmosphere and getting between you and the cosmos. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing to be on the Buffalo River on, say, an overnight float or an overnight hike, which this was what the case was for me on this particular trip. I did last year in August, I did with a buddy of mine, a good friend of mine, I hiked down the Center Point Trail to the Goats Trail. To the Goats Bluff. Okay, on Big Bluff, about 200 feet down from the top, at over 350 feet above the river, is a ledge, and there's a trail out on it. It's called the Goat Bluff Trail. It's called the Goat Trail on Big Bluff. Let me enunciate properly for all the nitpickers out there. It's the Goat Trail on Big Bluff. Now, what you need to know about the Goat Trail on Big Bluff is that it is 350 feet above the river. There are places on the Goat Trail that are less than 1 meter wide, less than 3 feet wide. There's one that I remember specifically that's significantly less than that. I would say 18 inches or less. And, your options are on your left side, rock wall, right side, quick trip to the grave. And that is not an exaggeration. And because of this, it offers, 350 feet above the river and the valley that it winds through, it offers an unparalleled view of the Buffalo River and the valley, the Ponca Wilderness, and also the southeastern, southwestern, and southern skies. It is a gorgeous place. But like I said, you got to take the good with the bad. The good is amazing view. The bad is don't make a wrong step. Watch your footing. I'm not going to comment on this because for some reason this is a highly contentious subject on the old Facebook and other online forums, but about taking children out on the Goat Bluff. I'm not really going to comment on it except to say, if you were listening to this and you want to go hike down there, understand that there are places that are as little as 18 to 24 inches wide, and one false step is the end. Period. People die there. It happens. As a search and rescue guy, I would be remiss if I did not put that statement out in the disclaimer of it is a very serious thing to fall there. I'll tell it to you this way, as a father of a 7-year-old. She's not going out on Goat Bluff for a few years. And I will make the decision when I think she is mature enough and skilled enough in hiking and aware enough. And she's a good kid. She listens, she minds, she's not hyperactive. Not my kid's life. I'm not gambling with my kid's life. It's too serious. Because like I say, there are some very, very narrow places. It would be a leash situation. It should be. And some, for me, it would be. I'm just not going to do it myself for some time until I think she's ready and capable. but it's a beautiful view up there. We'll get off of that little thing, but just be advised if you ever intend to take this trip. I think I already mentioned 800,000 visitors a year into Buffalo National River, the Ponca Wilderness. So it's a thing that is out there, and a lot of people will go there. You may just be hearing of this for the first time because it is a bit overlooked with all the things we have in the United States, like the Yosemites and the Smoky Mountains and, the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Rim Trail. There's a lot of big name things out there that everyone's got to put on their Instagram bucket list, right? But Buffalo National River, you won't be disappointed. So if you do come, I would have been remiss not to put in that disclaimer of what you're getting into if you want to hike out on the goat trail onto the face of Big Bluff. It is a long hike in and out. If you're doing an out and back, it is 9.4 kilometers or 5.9 miles. Now, this is a combination of the Center Point Trail, which is what you will actually hike in on, and the Goat Bluff Trail combined. They are two different trails. There is an intersection. Key is the Goat Trail is a quarter of a mile long, if I remember correctly, less than a half mile, somewhere in that area. It's the very end of this total 5.9 miles or 9.4 kilometers. You are going to gain, it's all downhill on the way in. You're cruising on the way in. It's a long hike and it's a little strenuous, but on the way in, not a big deal. The way out, it is 328 meters of elevation gain. That's 1,076 feet over. What is that going to be? 2.9 miles, 2.85 miles, something like that. 6 miles almost total in and out. So around 3 miles in, 3 miles out. 3 miles out, over that 3 miles, you're going to gain 1,100 feet roughly of elevation. There's not a good word that's suitable for all audiences here that I can use to properly articulate how I feel about the hike out, but let's just say the hike out sucks. It's a real hike. Your booty's going to burn, your thighs are going to burn, you're going to be sore for a couple of days. Totally worth it. Not trying to scare you off of it, just preparing you for the hike. Honestly, if you hike it leaf on, most of the hike, it's beautiful through the Ozark National Forest, through the Ponca Wilderness area, but you're not going to get a lot of breathtaking views with leaf on until you get to the bluff. But the payoff at the end is worth it. I'm talking absolute amazing view. Now, because this is a dark sky park, this was my plan for this hike. What my adventure was last year, and the plan from the get was I will hike in mid-afternoon, set up a camp somewhere as close as I can, probably hike down and scout the bluff so I kind of know if there's any really tight, dangerous situations before I'm tromping around on it in the dark with nothing but a flashlight, right? And then come back, have dinner, and then head down to the bluff at sunset for pictures at sunset, and then try to do some astrophotography. And I am, as I've mentioned previously, big-time amateur still photographer and do not have the money or equipment or technical skill for astrophotography, but in my little Canon T6 Rebel, you can get some pictures of the stars in the Milky Way in the best situations. You can get something. And I was experimenting with this, and for me, a lot of the things I go and do, guys, are to have a reason to go somewhere specifically and do something cool. So my plan was to hike down, camp as close as I could to Big Bluff, and stay on Big Bluff till late into the dark hours, into the night, trying to do some astrophotography of the Milky Way, which you're really in the heart of Milky Way viewing season when you're in August. And so that's what we did. We hiked down, got down, and right at the intersection of the Goat Trail and Center Point Trail, where it's going to cut off and take you down to the bluff on the Goat Trail, there's the last couple of camping spots that are already established anyway, that you can camp on. Beyond that, on the Goat Trail, there is no camping permitted. It is against regulation, rule, law. I'm not sure what specifically outlines that, but it is prohibited. That is the best way to put it. So we picked, I think there was 2 spots there that were kind of established. Picked the best of the 2 for hanging hammocks. We hung up our hammocks. Got our campfire ring put together, got everything squared away, and then hiked down to the trail to do a little scouting. Like I said, just to make sure. I mean, it's a safety thing, just a little pre-check. So we went down along the bluff. Oh my God, it's beautiful. Hung out with Ralph. Ralph is a rattlesnake that lives on the bluff. Most people see him. Apparently, he's fairly docile because everyone sees him. I saw him. And he doesn't really attack people, best I know, I guess. And there's not a lot of room on the bluff, guys. I mean, this isn't like Ralph's 30 feet away. It's there, he's within a few feet of you when you spot him. So be mindful of that. Unless somebody has done something to Ralph, there is a rattlesnake that just kicks it up there like it's a known thing. You're coming down the trail. People are coming back out like, man, there's a rattlesnake on the bluff. Yeah, that's a thing. There's always a rattlesnake out there. He's hiding most of the time, but just be aware. Ralph's down there. And you have these really cool trees, and I'm just going to pull this out of my tail right now because I can't remember. I think they're a juniper tree because I just went blank on it. I'm not going to stop to look it up. That have been up there for ages and ages, and I'm not going to pull that out and butcher that stat either, but there's a number on it, and they're several hundred years old. They're stunted in growth because of the way they're perched on the side of these rocky crags. It's they're kind of beautiful and picturesque in their own strange, arid, scraggly, scrawny kind of way, perched up above the valley. I got a couple of cool pictures of them, actually. But yeah, go out there and you scope out the bluff, hung out, talked to a few people coming and going, chatted about Ralph with one guy, talked to a couple of girls up there, very squarely hippie girls. And, this hippie thing is coming back and I'm here for it. Personally, I'm here for it. Like, I kind of dig the vibe, and they kind of tend to pop up everywhere I find myself. It's kind of intertwined with nature, as it were, like in getting out. But so we talked to them for a while, and then we hiked back up, give ourselves a break because it was hot. It was August, y'all. It was very August, and August in Arkansas is a hot place to be with the humidity. Now, people argue about this. I've been in Flagstaff. I've been in Phoenix, guys. Having experienced both worlds, I will take 115 degrees in Arizona with 0% humidity all day long over Arkansas at 99 with 80% humidity. One of them will kill you a lot faster and is more miserable to be in. From experience, just telling you. But we had sweated profusely that day on the way in. So we're like, and the bluff face is really hot. The sun's beating on it when you're in mid-afternoon and the rocks have heated up. Like, it's kind of like being in an asphalt parking lot in the summer. It's very hot. So we went back up to cool off and try to get something together for dinner. And got that done. While we were up there getting dinner together and kind of cooling down, talked to several people coming along. I was surprised by how many people were like, oh man, this is a great idea. Camp. Hike in and stay the night. Never thought of that for this particular trail. I mean, it's not really an overnight trail. It's not a part of the Highland network or anything like that. It is. It's 6 miles long. You can make it longer, sure. But a lot of people seemed kind of surprised by it and thought it was a really cool idea. That's one of my favorite things, guys. You're going to hear me say this 1 million times over the course of me making this podcast for however long I make it. My favorite parts are meeting the people out there and getting to know new people. And it's not hard. A smile and a hey, how are you today as they pass on the trail, and you will have a new friend 8 out of 10 times. Promise you. So we hung out, talked to people, anyway, got ready to go down around sunset. Timed it out, headed down for sunset. There was only one person left on the bluff coming up on sunset. They hung around for a minute and then they beat it. They wanted to get out before dark. See, that was kind of the beauty of this plan, is if we camp there, not only can we get sunset and not have to hike out in the dark, we can also do some dark sky astrophotography in my very amateur, low rent equipment kind of way. So we did. We got down there, checked out the bluff, walked back and forth, said hi to Ralph, and set up. Took some pretty decent pictures of sunset. Didn't have any clouds. I was disappointed in that. It's like that's the yin and the yang of that whole situation. When you're going for astrophotography, you don't want any clouds, but if you're going for sunset, you want clouds. Clouds are where you get the awe-inspiring sunsets. You have to have them up there to provide that contrast and something to turn pink and purple and deep blue and deep red. But then that'll kill you for the astrophotography. And that night, it worked out for the best because what I specifically went for was the astrophotography. Take my shot at the Milky Way. But sunset was a little bit of a flop on my end, at least out of me and my little Canon Rebel thing. My hiking partner, she had like the newest Android phone, and this is a thing, guys, that I don't know what to do with. I don't know how to place this in my mind and deal with it. The new phones, Androids and iPhones, and I have one myself, an iPhone. They're taking better pictures than I can take. The resolution's not quite there. It's not quite as much data, as many pixels to work with. But the overall step back view of a picture taken with her phone that night of the sunset, I mean, it made what I took look stupid. And I'm not a complete noob. If I'd say I'm an amateur, but I mean, I can take a sunset like anyone can take a sunset. I didn't get one that night worth a dang. And her phone had some nice pictures of the sunset. And I'm just not sure what to do with this as someone who wants to view photography as a bit of an art that is a mixture of art and science. And you can now just like in the phone you're going to buy anyway, point and click. And it looks better than what I can pull off with my $500 little camera setup. It frustrates me to no end. But at the same time, there's the principalistic argument, the philosophical argument there of, but they're still taking the picture. They're there doing it. They're in the situation. They're still, some people are still framing it out. They're still choosing their subject matter and putting together a well-composed picture. So, yeah, the medium is the medium. What difference does the tool you use make? So it's like this weird no man's land for me. What is up, all of you Wayward Souls? I want to tell you guys about our newest sponsor, Bendetti Optics, a brand based right here in the good old US of A, Portland, Oregon, to be exact. And I bought my first pair of Bendetti sunglasses about a year and a half ago and fell in love with them, so much so that I got online and ordered a couple of more pair. And when I did, there was a small shipping snafu, an order fulfillment snafu, and I got on the phone, gave him a call, and guess what? I get a call back from who? One of the big men themselves, right there in Portland, from the top of the chain. Have a great conversation, and we end up starting this great relationship we have. They more than made right the little snafu that occurred, and I am now a huge proponent of them because I can tell you from personal experience they are good people, and they're trying to compete with the big boys out there coming in at a price point of about $40 but using the exact same frame material, TR90, and the same polarization process as the big guys. As it turns out, something I think we are already probably knew in our hearts, when you buy big name sunglasses, you're buying a big name, not necessarily any more quality than you can get somewhere else, like at Bendetti Optics. They have 29 different styles. They have multiple polarization options for whatever climate you happen to live in. And they back it up with like this lifetime guarantee that if your dog eats your sunglasses, it doesn't matter how you break them, send it back in with a check to cover shipping and handling and you're golden. You got a new pair on the way. These guys are truly trying to do it right, and they have this philosophy that a really good pair of sunglasses should not cost you so much that you are afraid to wear them. And I think all of us outdoorsmen can relate to that. So if you guys, like me, are very practical and like to get more bang for your buck and wear some great looking sunglasses, check out BendettiOptics.com. That's Bendetti optics.com, or you can go over to Instagram /Bendetti Optics. And that I highly suggest, whether you buy a pair or not, just to check out the cutest pupper you'll ever see modeling sunglasses. Once again, that's BendettiOptics.com, and make sure and let them know Wayward Stories sent you. But anyway, off of that little rabbit hole, back onto the main trail, set up and watching sunset over the valley, over the Buffalo River. And in the way that the valley curves, you've got a horseshoe bend going on in the river coming at you, below you, and then turning away from you. It's very, very peaceful and grounding. It is a very centering experience to set in the quiet at sunset, especially like that night. Everyone bailed except for she and I. And we sat there on the bluff in silence, except for camera shutter. That's the only thing you could hear every so often was the click of a camera shutter. And then the locusts start. All of the critters of the night start as it starts to get dark and the sky gets darker and darker. And I mean, there's like a couple of hour window here where there's nothing happening, right? Because it's not quite dark enough for any kind of astro until you get 2 to 3 hours beyond dark, at least for me and my simple setup and lack of equipment. So sunset happens and you're just kind of sitting there for 2 or 3 hours, and it was nice. I mean, it was nice. Just looking over the valley, watching the stars start to appear. There was going to be a moon that night, but it was a late rise moon, so that worked out great as well. And it was just absolutely beautiful, absolutely serene, absolutely peaceful and calming. It was a beautiful, beautiful night for it. And then gets dark enough and you start taking pictures. And for me, it's a process of trial and error. I know generally where I want to be on the shutter, on the aperture, on the exposure, all the different things. On the ISO, pull all the filters off, just clean lens, shot at the sky. And you just start, for me, I just start messing around. I start going with it. I go wide open, ISO at like 6400, see what happens, see what it looks like. 30-second exposures, which 23 or 24 seconds is generally about as long as you can leave it open, leave the shutter open, without starting to get a little bit of a blur in the star trails, because the Earth is rotating really fast. But beyond 23, 24 seconds, you start to see that tail appear. But for me, I have good luck with the 30-second exposures on the Astro. Now, granted, my Astro is not amazing stuff that'll drop your jaw. But the stars are still pretty tack sharp at 30 seconds. And I need all of that 30 seconds with my little camera setup. And again, lack of, accessories to pull off night shots. And I get some pretty neat shots of the Milky Way. So anyway, finally locate the Milky Way. You take some test shots of the sky. Once it gets dark enough, you can pick it out with your naked eye up there on the Buffalo River. Again, dark sky park status. Once I've located the Milky Way, I start playing with the exposure, start playing with the length of the shutter, et cetera, the aperture. And what I found that night, the best shots I got were 4.2. 3.5 is wide open for my camera. I was getting the actual best results, contrast to the Milky Way at 4.2, ISO at like 3200, like actually reeling it in a little bit to let a little bit less light in comparatively to the 6400. And at 30 seconds. And I took, 200 shots that night. Boy, those are nights the editing is not so much fun. Looking through 200 pictures that are nearly identical, trying to find the one that's got the best contrast or the best color or the best sharpness in it. But I did pull one shot out of that night that made everything, the hike in and then everything that is about to occur in the hereafter, it's a little foreshadowing for you, made all of it worth it. To me, again, it's not a jaw dropper. It's not multiple stacked images with, the foreground exposed with bright light composited in over 10, 20-second exposures of the Milky Way and all composited into one photograph. Like, that's not my forte in photography at this moment. Maybe someday, but I don't have time for that right now. I have a different way of seeing the world. It's not knocking on the people that do it, because you guys that do that, I love your pictures. I wish that there were an easier way for me to pull them off. I would give I mean, you could take my spleen with a plastic spoon and no anesthetic if I could just go out and take pictures like that. But it's a much more involved process, and most of the other things I do, like this podcast, my YouTube channel, all that stuff, that takes up all my involved processes. But you guys, not knocking you. I'm all about what you're doing out there. But for me, it's not really, it is an option, but not one I'm choosing at this point in life. But so it's not a jaw dropper, but it is. You can see the Milky Way. You can see all the speckly, shiny stars throughout the Milky Way. But like the best part of it is at the very end of the exposure, a shooting star started to come into frame right through the center of the Milky Way. So I've got a little shooting star with a tail starting into the shot. For me, that made it all worth it that night. That was the picture I was after. The shooting star was just, gosh, it was just icing on the cake. And again, if I put it out there on the Instagram, which I have before, but if I put it out there on Instagram and like sky porn or something, it's not going to get a whole lot of hearts. It's just not there with what the people, professionals, and not even professionals, just really good amateurs that focus on astro. It's not par with that. It's just not. But for me, totally worth it. Totally what I was after and made me happy. Now, I foreshadowed that some events occurred after that point in the night that in some situations may have made that trip miserable. And to be fair and truthful, it was pretty miserable. But it was still worth it, still something I would do again, and still something that I suggest to any of you that maybe you should consider doing. But anyway, so let's just get to it. So we go back up. We get off the bluff, 2 flashlights, working together, making sure we're doing this safely, because you are literally pitch black, 350 feet to the river. In places, very tight window, very low tolerance for mistakes. Get back up to camp, get the fire stoked up, I think that night we actually took some cans of beef stew because it was such a short hike. Took a can of beef stew a piece or something, threw it in the fire, cracked the cap on it, set it next to the fire, let it warm up, had a hot meal, which was so awesome compared to like trail mix or a protein bar or anything like that after a day like that where you've expended 1 billion calories in the hot sun. There was nothing quite like hot beef stew. And I don't know how to explain that, but I was starving and it was amazing. And we cleaned up, zipped everything up in Ziploc bags, put it all in our backpacks, chilled out around the fire for a while, just talked, chatted, and then jumped into the old hammock and we're swinging to sleep. And first and foremost, I was already kind of miserable because I had sweated a ton. It was a hot day. I had expended a lot of energy and I had dropped a lot of sweat and I was sticky and it was bad. But the temperature dropped overnight. There was something of a cold front that came through. Did not bring storms or rain, but it did bring a significant temperature decrease, which also is going to drop up there because you're on the top of a ridge in that very particular area. At the bottom of the valley, there's a lot of airflow. And it got pretty dang cold that night. Well, I hiked in for a summer overnight hike with nothing but a sleeping bag liner to cover myself in. And with that like dried sweat all over me and that cold wind blowing and humming through my hammock, I was in rough shape that night. I was not having a good night to start with as far as that's concerned. And then nigh on, I would say we were up on the bluff till 12:30 or 1. Then nigh on, say 2 o'clock, just when I'd finally overcome how miserable I was. And I think I was literally in that phase right between wake and sleep where sometimes you get sleep paralysis. And all of a sudden, a ruckus was raised across the valley. And there was like screaming and there was like hissing and it was going down, y'all. And it was going down like 15 feet from my head. So the two of us are trying to wrestle our way loose out of this double hammock, trying to find a flashlight, which is actually quite simply placed in the little pocket hanging off the double hammock. But 2 humans tangled in a hammock, trying to get a flashlight out in the middle of the night in the dark when all hell has broken loose in your camp where there should be no one or anything else, making noises that are otherworldly and ungodly. It was a little bit of a cluster, okay? But finally, I get my hands on a flashlight. Finally, I get it turned on and shine the flashlight into the dark by the smoldering fire that had burned down to not produce much light, and see that there is a raccoon battle royale going down. And I'm talking, these raccoons were throwing it, man. Like, it was fisticuffs. One raccoon was getting murdered. She was catching all the paws. It was brutal, and the screams sounded like human beings. And then you hear this noise in the distance, and it sounds like shh, shh. And you go back, and I finally get my light over there, and one of the raccoons had taken advantage of the opportunity of the gang fight that was happening in the middle of camp and had grabbed my partner's backpack by the drag handle and was dragging it like 2 feet at a time into the woods. That was the noise. And then that was it for that. Like, people were coming out of hammocks full speed because that backpack was not disappearing into the woods. So, get out, stop raccoon battle royale, the rumble in the jungle. We put an end to that and kind of ran him off, except for one, the really big one that was pulling the backpack. He was one of the biggest raccoons I've ever seen. He could have passed for like a medium-sized dog. We called him Richard because Richard was really, really a Richard. He kept coming back and trying to screw with stuff over and over and over again. So Richard, it keeps prowling around camp while we're trying to get everything back together. We're trying to figure out, why are they after our backpacks? Because I'm not worried about black bears in Arkansas, though we have them. They're not a concern to me. But everything was sealed up for wildlife. I mean, God, guys, I've had squirrels and raccoons previously in camps take things apart and tear open sacks of bread, whatever. Like, there can't be any smell escaping. So we went prepared for this. The trash was, put into Ziploc bags and sealed off. I mean, as airtight as it can get. We also had water bags that we, at least one, because it should be airtight, that we put everything into. What were they smelling? I don't know. Was there like a freaking stray Slim Jim chunk or a peanut or something in the bottom of one of the bags maybe? I don't know. I still don't know why. But they were about those bags. And Richard just kept like stalking around camp. So finally, we got all of that squared away. Lay back down. Got the bags hung up on a tree as best we could. Pulled out the paracord. Strung them up as best we could. Get back into the hammock. Miserable yet again. Still freezing. It's only getting colder and windier as the night progresses. And I'm in basketball shorts and a t-shirt, soaking wet in sweat. Well, dried sweat. And trying to get warmed up and finally get almost, possibly back to sleep. And suddenly, in the distance, you hear Then came the hogs. Let me tell you guys, if you're not familiar with feral hogs, we have more than our share in the state of Arkansas. As a matter of fact, the University of Arkansas mascot is a feral hog. If you don't know about feral hogs, you clearly don't live in the South, because we are overran with feral hogs in the South. Here's what you need to know about feral hogs. They will kill you hard. Like, they will kill you to death. They will kill you and then keep killing you. Everybody knows. Even the manliest man hunter you will ever come across, if you say, I ran into hogs in the woods, they'll go, oh man, hogs will mess you up. Because they will. Some interesting notes on feral hogs. I never knew this until I actually researched about them a little bit before I started this episode. Feral hogs are an invasive species to North America. They were introduced by Hernando de Soto in the 1500s. And they've just been tearing up Jack ever since. And like, as a matter of fact, somebody at a county extension office here in the state of Arkansas, I think it was like 2013 or 16, something like that, an article I found, said basically the war against feral hogs in Arkansas is World War III. Like, they're to the point of like, we have to like do mass extermination or we're not going to have crops anymore. Like the hunting, the regulatory hunting that goes on every year during hunting season, it's not enough. It's not even close to enough. And they can reproduce like rabbits reproduce, apparently. When they're 6 months old, they're able to reproduce again. Like, they're apparently a huge problem. But what you need to know is they will tear you up. So being alone 3 miles from the closest anything and nothing but hammocks, feral hogs are a legitimate concern. Okay? So, sat down, got out of the hammock and said, that's it. There is no sleep tonight for me. The night's almost gone anyway. So I stoked the fire as high as I could, A, to try to ward off hogs, and B, to try to keep myself warm. And just sat there, quite miserably, staring at the fire until dawn, listening to the hogs root and grunt and snort in the distance. Like, here's a thing about feral hogs, like, to hammer home the point how serious of a situation this is. They can run 25 miles an hour, which rules out you getting away, to be honest. And when they charge, they do like surprise attack charges. So the odds of you even be able to clamber up a tree are not great. Get this, in recorded wild hog attacks on human beings, 15% mortality rate for the human. Like, you have a 15% chance. That's way more than I want to hear. 1.5 out of 10 attacks, somebody dies. They're for real. And like, on that note, like, I'm going to put this in here because as it is, we already know, people in the South already know you should be aware of wild hogs and the situation that you can find yourself in. They can tear you up. So I found online at therestlessbackpacker.com basically how to survive a hog attack. So I'm putting it in here. It's going in because I didn't know this stuff. I know bear attacks, like all of us hikers and outdoorsmen and outdoorsmen and women, we know like how to survive, or not how to survive, the best way to try, what you need to do in a grizzly attack, what to do, in a mountain lion attack. These are all things that you learn. Nobody ever talks about a wild hog attack. And they're a very real threat anywhere in the South. And apparently even California now, as I learned last night. But anyway, here are the bullet points on restlessbackpacker.com if you want to source this for how to survive a hog attack. Number 1, remain calm. Good luck with that. Number 2, keep a safe distance. Again, if you're being attacked, the safe distance is out the window. 3, slowly back away from the boar. And I will attest to this, not with a boar, but especially with dogs, and apparently this is true of most wild animals. Don't turn your back on them. Y'all, I've been bitten 14 times now in my 3 years delivering packages. And what I've learned is even the most aggressive dog, almost all of them, if you will stay facing them, even if you're retreating, if you're facing them, they're way more hesitant to actually come after you if you're facing them. So, back away slowly from the wild boar. If you have time, try to reach higher ground such as a boulder, car, possibly even climb a tree. But please consider that this might be hard to apply due to the closeness and speed of a wild boar surprise charge. When attacked, do everything in your power to keep your footing. Try to sidestep them quickly. I assume this is like bull matador situation, sidestep, kind of like, bullfighters do. To avoid getting swung by its tusks. And I mean, again, Google a feral hog and look at those tusks. They will jack you up. And if all else fails, if all the above fails, fight back with whatever is available at hand. Sticks, your bare hands, a knife, a gun, anything until the mauling ends. Even when attacked, try to keep your standing position by any means possible, as you can suffer greater injuries once down, because they will continue to attack you and then they will trample you after they've attacked you and have you on the ground. They want you to die. Apparently the rules are the same, kind of like with a grizzly bear more than anything, or a black bear especially. or a grizzly bear especially, but also like black bears. Winter black bear's dangerous when you get between a mother and her cubs, right? This is apparently a very similar situation. Hogs are territorial. If they've got babies, a lot more aggressive, a lot more protective of what they have. So just be aware of the little hog situation. So anyway, I'm gonna tell you all that and get to, kind of the anticlimactic ending, which was setting up until dawn. And I'm talking first light, we bolted. And when I say first light, I mean it was still dark in the woods, but the sky started to lighten up. Turned on the flashlights, we were packed up and we were rolling because we were done with that night and that hike. 2.9 miles out at 6 a.m. on no sleep. On an elevation gain of 1,076 feet over the 2.9 miles. That was a miserable hike. There's no other way to paint it. That was a miserable hike. Got almost to the top and the hogs returned. I actually saw 4 or 5 of them cross the trail in front of me, along with many deer. We saw deer that night too, coming out. Also, when you're the first person out at 6 a.m. or in on any trail, you're the chief spiderweb catcher in charge of the universe anyway. So I'm catching all these webs. The deer coming and going, they're nice, but then the hogs. And the hogs, again, you're watching them because you don't want to get mauled by a hog, because that's a very bad situation. But we finally got out. No hog mauling. Covered in spider webs, but no hog mauling. Totally over that hike and that last 12 to 16 hours, however long it was. It was an interesting night. Spent the night down there. Got a great picture of the Milky Way by my standards of taking photographs anyway. Had a great dinner. And then, trod across Hell's Acres for the next 6 hours of the night. It was interesting. I want to encourage you all to go do this though. I want you all to go see the goat trail on Big Bluff. I want you all to go hike down the Center Point Trail. I want you all to go do this hike. Don't be deterred by the bad night I had. Like, there are lessons that could be learned, okay, from a night like I had. 1, go with a little bit more preparation for sleeping to be a little bit warmer. Number 2, big lesson I learned. This is when I discovered body wipes. I remembered many years ago, like in 2008 and 9, on a TV show I worked on, we covered the Honubi, spelled Honobia, but I promise you I'm from Southeast Oklahoma. It's pronounced Honubi. Honubi Bigfoot Festival for this TV show on the Fringe. And we were there for 3 days, staying in like an old Boy Scout camp. They had running water, but it was a hard nope. Those showers, that was a hard nope. That was like Nightmare on Elm Street type of stuff. It was just terrifying, and it looked like you would be filthier when you came out, and just nobody was there for it. It wasn't going to happen. We bathed. We went 4 dudes, okay? 4 dudes being really stinky dudes after 3 days. I think it was 3 days we were down there camping. It was bad. We were bathing with baby wipes. So anyway, on this trip, I remembered this and I started Googling because, again, we're into the 2020s, y'all. Everything's different now. We got tech and innovations and stuff coming out our ears. So I bet they make wipes that are made for like cleaning your body while you're camping or hiking, or for soldiers that are deployed in the field in a hot zone. Like, sure enough, they do. And they're amazing. I've tried them since then. Just be advised. Body wipes, pick your brand. I don't know what's best. I've only bought one kind and tried one kind, and it worked great. It helps get the dried sweat off of you, etc., etc. So that was the second lesson I learned that night. And the third lesson I learned from this whole ordeal, which is probably the most important lesson that I learned from it, is the first rule of Raccoon Fight Club is that you do not talk about Raccoon Fight Club. I'm going to have to watch my back now because I've done talked about it, told the whole world. But yeah, overall, don't want to deter you. I want you to make this trip. I want you to see this beautiful, often overlooked, beautiful gem that we have right here in my current state of residence, Arkansas, the Buffalo National River, Big Bluff, the Goat Trail, the Ponca Wilderness, and there's so much more in that area for you to go see. Those are going to be in future episodes. There's so much there. I want you to go see it. Do not be deterred by my bad night. Be entertained by it. That was the goal of telling the story tonight, was to entertain you, not to turn you off of the Buffalo National River, because it is an amazing place that I hope you will all go. And that pretty much wraps up the story that I have to tell tonight. And I think I've run on close to an hour now, which is where we're kind of hanging out right now with these episodes. So we will wrap this up. I want to thank you all again for joining me on the Wayward Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to telling your story. So far, we've only told mine because I got to get you guys writing stories in. Send them to mywaywardstory@gmail.com or go over to the website at waywardstories.com. You can submit it through the contact form there. And also check out photo galleries. You can probably see that Big Bluff picture I'm talking about. You know what? I bet that's not on there. I've got to update the photo galleries. Anyway, check out photo galleries. Check out Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, links to everything. Patreon.com. If you want to go to Patreon and support the show at any level of anything, you would totally be helping us out and keeping the lights on. And know this, 20% of all proceeds from Patreons to the show will always go to a charity every single month. And just check out everything you can and get those stories sent in to me. I don't think I have anything else to cover tonight. Take a moment here to awkwardly look at my list of things to always point out at the end of the show, the wrap-up sheet. Now, we got it all. waywardstories.com, and send your story to mywaywardstory@gmail.com. I'm glad you were here again tonight. I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, be good to each other and go out there and do something good in the world.
We here at Studio 119 would like to remind all of you out there listening, wherever you might be, that though the hill might be steep and the trail be rocky, the mountaintop awaits. Carry on.